All right, so if we describe loss of land and we're talking about loss of arable land, what are we really describing? Loss of land that's useful to grow crops. And if I'm going to go a step further, which I think we covered too, and we're going to talk about land to grow crops, what do we need in land to be able to grow crops? Good. We need topsoil. Good job, Christian. And if we lose this topsoil and we lose that cropland or the ability to grow crops, what happens to the land? What do we say about that? The land is what? Degraded or taken to a state which is no longer the original state. And when you take a cropland and you degrade it to a different state, what kind of shift do we have?
Changes in biome.
Changes in biome. What shift?
Desertification.
Good. So now we question always the test. If I say changes in biome in the test, my test is missing information. I could start with saying there's a shift in a biome from a grassland or a cropland to a desert, okay? You want to include the full statement. All right, so here comes the confusion of the slides. I believe this slide is blank for you, but if you go to today's download, this slide has the font. So go ahead and go there. To remind you, what have we been talking about? Problems with what? Land that arise from farming. Either the production of crops or the transportation of crops or any part of crop or cattle production or food production in general. So this is definitely an issue with croplands. When you irrigate, water contains, no matter what type of water, contains some amount of salt. Obviously, salt water has a high concentration of salt. Fresh water does not. But what happens when you irrigate lands like excessively? What's going to happen to the water? It's going to evaporate. So crops can only take in so much water. So the ideal situation is to irrigate so that crops can use the water and the excess water is not wasted. But at the end of the day, it is. And a lot of it evaporates, leaving salt remains behind, which causes a lot of damage to the land because, and here's where you have to think beyond the box, okay? Applied science is environmental science. If salt is all over the front of a cropland, what immediately you think is going to happen to the crops? Why? They're going to wither. Osmosis is going to occur. They're going to try to balance with their environment. They're going to lose water. And eventually they're like, now they're drowned of water, okay? So this is what happens. We also have the other situation where what's happening to water here? What's happening here? And this is a vocab word. That doesn't make any sense at all because why would you call it waterlogging? But what is this picture showing you? Overwater, good. In order, again, to irrigate, sometimes they saturate the land to a point where it's considered way packed with water. And I'm going to talk to you in the next couple slides of all the things that can happen. But one that I want you to be really aware of is the loosening of soil. And once soil is loosened, it's more susceptible to going away and leading to a degradation of topsoil. So it's a problem. And that's the next slide. So this is a global problem that's happening with soil. It can happen naturally. It can happen, obviously, due to poor farming, as I just mentioned. And it's called what? What happens to soil when that's a global problem? Erosion. What is that? Of what? Good. And if we're talking about nutrients in soil, what are we talking about? What part of soil? Top. So the wearing away of the topsoil is actually erosion. That's why it was important for you guys to learn those horizons and what they're made out of. And then it gets to the point where the land has a struggle to regenerate, and that's desertification or degradation. If it happens naturally, what's causing it? So soil erosion happens all over the world naturally because of weather. So wind and water is going to do it more specifically because really not temperature so much, but weather involves wind and water. And then obviously industrialized farming is completely a trigger to erosion of the soil. So let's look at the layers of soil. All right, but obviously she made up mine. All right, so you went through this already. So this should be a cake. You could give me all the answers, right? Some of them were wrong, you notice. It didn't matter as long as you put some effort towards this assignment so that at least you can understand. You have to know, so 1 year these came out, this was an essay. You had to know each horizon and what they made up of, okay? So O horizon is what? Made up of what? No. It's what? Yes. It's all the litter, and it's composed of that humus or like rich content ready to be decomposed to form a horizon, which is made up, which we call what? Topsoil. Why is that the topsoil? Because that's where the tree roots tap into, and that's where they need to get their nutrients from. So everything that happens in O goes to A and provides the plants with what they need. And it's all about that. These two are the most important, okay? That's why a lot of farmers will use methods where they will self-fertilize by leaving remains of crops to kind of decompose and regenerate the soil. What do we know about E? What happens here? Correct, which is what? Another word for? Leaching. Good. This is the zone where infiltration is happening, okay? So you've got movement of minerals from one area to another. And really when you look at soil, you think of this as the important part. And this is kind of like the what's being built up to that, okay? So this is where nutrients travel through, okay? It's mainly made up of silt and minerals. I want you to know, though, that all soil has sand, silt, and clay. And I'm going to give you a diagram that describes sand, silt, and clay, because that also comes up every year. And that also has what? What does all layers of soil have besides sand, silt, and clay? Rock, because that's a form of, right? The little particles are forms of that. And one more thing. Yes, air. What else? Which helps leaching. Water. Okay? Water, remember, water infiltrates, percolates, and ends up in an aquifer and then runs off. So it's going to go through all layers. Organic material, no. Organic material on the top, and then you've got inorganic towards the bottom only. So now we're in the B horizon, subsoil. It's kind of like the middleman. You could put subsoil or mineral zone. And then what happens in C? Parent. So it's like the first generation of soil, because underneath it is all what? Rock. Solid boulders. Like a lot of your pictures are probably better than mine in distinguishing, because you see big, giant rock under bedrock, and then you see kind of it starting to break apart, and eventually you only see tiny particles, which goes up. OAEBCR, create something to learn. I mean, we did, I forgot already. We continue with problems on land. So in farming, you have to irrigate. That causes a lot of problems. You have to till the land. That causes loosening of soil. And now we're on pesticides. What does that lead to? Pesticides. They're pesticides. What's in them? Chemicals that are toxic, right? And they literally contaminate the soil. Now let's ask the question. Notice how I'm moving this way. If I spray pesticides and I'm contaminating the soil, what am I actually doing? That's ecological. Let's go back to that, because you struggled with that.
It's going to the animals.
Okay, again, if I'm going to describe ecological, I got to make a connection to the ecosystem. So if I contaminate soil, I am what? You said? I'm contaminating the plants, because plants obtain their nutrients from the soil. So they're going to take in nutrients that have toxins in them. And if you remember way back when we did the food chain, what happens to organisms when they take in toxins?
They die.
No, they can die. Remember biological amplification?
Do they poop it out?
No. It accumulates in their tissues and it increases in concentration. And then it goes to the next organism that feeds off it, getting higher. We're going to cover that in a little while. So again, we're going back many chapters ago and starting to make connections where you have to try to remember. And if I tell you about the eagle's eggs, does that ring a bell? They had the highest level of, so they looked at a whole food chain and they took the top predator, okay, or the top of the food chain, and notice that the concentration of toxin was at the highest. And this toxin was DDT, which is a pesticide that I'm going to talk about probably tomorrow. All right, water problems. I'm going to finish with air today. So problems with water. Obviously, the first problem is what? What have I told you about irrigation systems?
It's overusing.
It's overusing. Good. They're not efficient. They're wasting water and depleting our aquifers, which is one of our water resources, because they use a lot and because of the evaporation exceeding the drop, okay? But please remember that when I say deplete water resources, I'm talking about aquifers, okay? So write that word. Because we tap into aquifers to provide irrigation. Just made the picture less. All right, whatever. Aquifers, okay? Just remember it's there. All right, also excess water that does hit the land and doesn't get absorbed by the crops fast enough will increase runoff. And now we go back to another topic we already talked about. What happens when you have increased runoff?
You have more like pesticides in the water.
So you're going to have possible contamination from pesticides that can run off, right, with the water, and eutrophication. Fertilizers that contain a lot of what? Phosphate and nitrogen will provide excess nutrients to a body of water, and then it'll cause eutrophication. So we're going to add those words here. So increased runoff can cause soil erosion. Let's start with that because it's loosening the soil. It can lead to toxins from pesticides, and it could also lead to excess, let's call it excess nutrients, which is basically in parentheses eutrophication, right? Untraditional. All right, what else can happen? Which kind of ties into the last one. If water runs off, it's leading to, I don't know why I just mixed those slides. It's leading to pollution, yeah. And honestly, I just covered that slide. So pesticides and fertilizers can run off into a body of water. So these two slides are merged. I just forgot that they were two different slides. So pesticides, here's another connection. And only one person made this connection on their test, and I think it was amazing. Her name is Anya. Pesticides release volatile organic compounds, something I hadn't told you before. But remember, I don't know if it was Peer J or you, they had to do something with volatile organic compounds. But they had to do a little more. So you guys had the acid, right? They had the volatile organic compounds, which can cause what forms from volatile organic compounds? Smog. But what forms? So we've got PANS and ozone. So we're going to talk about ozone again, okay? And these volatile organic compounds will lead to the reaction where ozone will be emitted, which leads to smog. And what else? What else is ozone in the lower atmosphere responsible for? Greenhouse gases and global warming. So she made that connection. There's her ecological connection. VOCs can lead to the production of ozone, which is a greenhouse gas, which can cause climate change, ecological. More connections to agricultural or food production and greenhouse gases. What are they? CH4, good. Produced from, you can't just say, guys, cows. You have to say cows, well, that wasn't your class either, but you have to say cows remains and or cows flatulation or, you know, releasing gases or something. All right, what else? What other greenhouse gases? Nitrous oxide connected to what? Fertilizer. And H2O connected to irrigation. And nitrous oxide, notice this arrow. Why is this arrow pointing to nitrous oxide too?
Because plows also release.
Plows how release? Good. Burning of fossil fuels release methane, and they also release carbon dioxide, which is also a greenhouse gas. And there's your connection.